I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Join me today as I talk to Gordon Ferguson. Gordon has served as an evangelist, elder, teacher, and author. And in this episode, he talks about his journey to Christ, the secret to his happy marriage with his wife, Theresa, how he got connected with the discipling movement, what went through his mind as he lay close to death from cancer, what he'd do differently if he had his life to do over again, and what he sees as essential for future growth in our family of churches. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Hey, this is Rob, and I want to say thank you for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. I am really looking forward to talking to Gordon Ferguson, one of my heroes in the faith since I became a Christian back in 1986. He's recently been battling cancer and nearly died. His reflections as he teetered on the brink of death are really powerful. I'm also starting a new semester at the University of Arizona. Every year I always feel nervous about the start of school, just thinking about evangelizing and reaching out, and also the excitement about meeting new people and the people that are going to get saved. I'll be supporting Kevin and Erica Liu, who are leading the campus ministry. My plan is to help build this college ministry into a fountain of future disciples and leaders who will spread the gospel and plant more churches. I started this podcast at the beginning of the COVID pandemic to inspire people to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. I wanted to learn from others and share what I've learned over the years. It was so great to see so many of you at the conference and to hear how you benefited from listening. I felt so connected to people at the conference. It was fantastic. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd like to ask you to support it on Patreon at patreon.com/Rob Skinner. That's patreon.com/Rob Skinner. Patreon is spelled Patreon. This will help me cover the costs of production, equipment, and enable me to continue to produce useful and inspiring material. You'll join a community of like-minded disciples who want to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, and who want to live a no-regrets life and make this life count. Thanks again. I'm here with Gordon Ferguson. Gordon, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here, Rob.
Now, Gordon, I've known you since late 80s when I was a baby Christian. You were in San Diego at the time and would often come up to San Francisco and visit Tom Brown when he was leading the church there. And those were great days. I just remember being so inspired by your preaching. So it's a real blessing to be able to spend this time together.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing the podcast. I know a lot of people get encouragement from it. And if I can contribute to encouraging people, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, Gordon, let's go way back. How'd you become a Christian?
Well, that's a complicated answer to that one. I heard at the conference a few days ago, someone tell their conversion story, and somebody met them, cold contact, invited them to a Bible talk. They went, started studying, got baptized in 2 or 3 weeks. And I thought, wow, I wish I had such an easy story. But basically, I was raised in a group that called themselves Church of Christ, but it was different than most of us would think, even from the mainline Church of Christ, as I call the more traditional churches of Christ. I write about it in a book I wrote called My 3 Lives. And I think the publisher put on there 1 man, 3 movements, but this was my first movement. It was a very unusual, small, weird church that kind of turned me off. I did get baptized at a church camp when I was 13, but I never trusted that to be a real conversion. I didn't repent, I did not change, etc. I was pretty much turned off to church, but then my wife kept wanting to go to church. She was raised in the Baptist church, and when we got married, we were pretty young. She kept wanting to go to church, so we occasionally did. Maybe every 2, 3 weeks, she could persuade me not to go fishing, but to go with her to church. And so finally, I just said, I can't go to yours for some definite reasons that I told her, but she said, well, I'll go with you. So we started going to a more traditional type of Church of Christ.
Mm.
And even though I wasn't into it, I did it only for her. God worked it out for us to go to one church that had a guy in it that was a unique ball of wax, I would say. But he liked to fish. And he found out I had a fishing boat, and he asked me to take him fishing, which I thought, wow, that's the last thing I want to do is get hooked into a fishing trip with a preacher guy. But I didn't know how to say no, so I said yes. And it turned out this guy was just amazing.
Mm.
And he helped me fall in love with Jesus. My life totally changed. I got the preaching bug, wanted to become a preacher, etc. So I started living the life of a disciple a long time before I got baptized as one.
I see.
So later, when I was actually in that San Diego setting that you mentioned, that was my first entrance into what we then called the discipling movement. But at that point, I was teaching the right things, but I realized that my baptism was not accompanied by the kind of repentance I read about in the Bible. So I was baptized again in San Diego just before I left.
I see. So now, like in the 80s, late 80s?
Yeah, that would have been 87.
Okay. Well, again, how did you and Theresa meet? How did you guys get together?
Okay, that's a simpler story. We went to the same junior high school.
Okay.
And so we met when we were about 12 years old, and both of us were band kids. So we got put in a lot of classes together. We didn't like each other at all. In fact, it was definitely oil and water. We didn't get along at all the way through high school until we were seniors. And when we were seniors, I was in a school with a lot of ROTC guys. About half the guys in school were in ROTC, pretty good size high school. And so they had a practice of electing women to be the sponsors for the officers in ROTC. And so I was company commander of one of the companies, and they had this basic popularity contest, and Theresa's best friend was my sponsor, and Theresa was my exec officer sponsor. And they had these very nice looking white summer uniforms. And when I introduced her to the company, all the sponsors, but when I introduced Theresa in particular, something happened. There was a spark there. She looked so awesome in that uniform, and I thought, I should reconsider this. So we started dating that fall, and very quickly thought we would get married, and we did 4 years later between our last 2 semesters in college.
Okay, so you have an accent, so I'm assuming this is the South, Texas?
Yeah, we're both raised in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is sort of Baja, Texas. It's right across the border from Texas. So it's more like East Texas.
Okay, so you're both from Louisiana. And Gordon, how old are you? Like what year was this when you guys met?
Well, the year we met would have been probably 1955. We graduated high school in 61 and college together in 65. I'll be 80 years old in October, and she'll be 79.
Okay, so you're turning 80 this year.
Yeah, in a couple of months.
Wow. Okay, so you're born in, what is that? What does that make?
42.
1942. Okay.
Yeah, we were the war babies. A lot of people aren't familiar with that. They're familiar with the boomers, which came along slightly after us, but we were the ones born during World War II.
You never hear anything about that generation.
But there was a generation called the war babies, or the war generation. I guess war babies is all I ever knew. But for example, They built new schools for our generation. We went to a new junior high school. That's where we met. And so it was actually a larger generation boom than most people realize.
Wow. Okay. So you guys went to college together, same place. Where'd you go?
Yeah, Northwestern State University. It's in part of Natchitoches, Louisiana, which happens to be the oldest city in the Louisiana Purchase.
Okay. Now, for those not familiar with Louisiana, what part of the state is where? I mean, is this up in the north where Duck Dynasty comes from, or what are we talking about here?
It's actually sort of in the middle of the state. And when you go on south, you get into the real Cajun culture, which most people think of when they think of Louisiana. And as I said, I think my part of Louisiana, the northwest part, is more like East Texas. But Natchitoches is in the middle. And so the students in the school were about half from North Louisiana and half from South Louisiana. North Louisiana is mainly Protestant. South Louisiana is almost altogether Catholic. And so there was quite a mixture in that school. It was very interesting how we came back Sunday night if we visited our weekend parents, that the Southern group would come up having partied all the way up, and the North Louisiana guys would have gone to church and had lunch with their parents and driven back under blue laws and no alcohol. So,
okay, so all right, so it wasn't a religion. You didn't go to Bible school. You weren't really super religious at that time.
No, I was very much worldly.
Okay.
The school we were in, our mascot was Demons, the Northwestern State Demons, and that fit quite well. It was a wild school, party school, and I was right in the middle of all of that.
Okay, so it's a little hard for me to imagine that, but in any case, okay. Tell me from that point, maybe you can just give me a quick overview of where you went from there and how you got to where you're at. And just give me a broad overview of where you've lived and served.
We got out of college and both taught school. My wife was a sixth grade teacher with a minor in library science, and I was a band director, actually. I was a musician guy. And Louisiana was a good place to do that. I played trombone, and I did a lot of Dixieland and dance bands and escapades, fill-ins and all kinds of things, and taught school. So I was a junior high band director, then a high school band director. And then about 4 years after we got out of college, I had gotten the preaching bug, as I mentioned, from my fisherman preacher friend. And so I went back to school, and I think I was 27, went to what was called a preacher school, a very intense 2-year program that went through the entire Bible a verse at a time. So it was very text oriented. We had other classes, preaching classes, interpretation, etc., but it was mainly textual study. And so I went through that 2-year program and then went up to the Northwest to Vancouver, Washington, and a mainline Church of Christ. And I was actually tutored. We were holding personal evangelism workshops. And the guy that was doing it was pretty well known, and he got too busy. And so they needed someone else to do it. And it wasn't that big a church. So they wanted to hire somebody young that they could afford and would work for a lot less than he did, and that they thought had potential to hold those workshops. So I ended up, through a weird series of events, being the one that they hired. And this guy that mentored me in how to do the personal evangelism workshops had actually been a professional motivational speaker. And he was really, really effective.
Wow.
And he taught me a lot in a hurry. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I was invited to come back to the School of Preaching, mainly because of my focus on evangelism. They felt like they needed to have a lot more evangelism going on. So I taught all kinds of courses. I was one of the regular instructors. but I did teach a course or two in personal evangelism, as well as preaching in Romans and Revelation and a lot of other courses. So I did that for 4 years. Then I preached for a church in the area. I quit full time at the preacher school and still taught some part time. But I then preached for a church in the area for 3 years. And then after that, went back to the Northwest to Tacoma, Washington, to a mainstream church. That's about the time that I met the discipling movement.
Okay, so let me interrupt you right there.
All right.
First of all, what was the name of the preacher school you went to?
Preston Road School of Preaching in
Okay.
Dallas, Texas.
And is that still there?
It is not still there. It ceased to exist a few years ago. You still have the bigger one, which is Sunset School of Preaching out in Lubbock, Texas.
Right.
That one still operates.
Okay. And then your mentor, the guy up in Vancouver, Washington, the professional speaker, who was that?
His name was J.T. Bristow.
J.T. Bristow. Okay. And so he continued to do that after you left.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So during this period of time, we're talking the 70s. Is that when this is going on?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead. And so you went back up to the Northwest, up to Tacoma.
1981, which is the same year that I met the discipling churches. And so I stayed there 4 years trying to turn that church around. And finally, that did not work. And through another very interesting series of events, also written about in that book, My Three Lives, I tell about how I got invited to come down to San Diego. And that was most of my big event situations were connected to a lot of very strange coincidences.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. How did you get connected with the discipling movement? First of all, you grew up in a secular environment. You're pretty worldly. You get, well, no, wait a second. You're kind of in a sect within the churches of Christ.
Right.
But you reject that. So you live a worldly period of life, and then you get involved in the mainstream, the main line. I mean, then you go all in. You become a preacher for it.
Yeah.
How did you get connected with the discipling movement?
Well, in the mainline movement, there was a period of time of about, I don't know, a decade maybe, where churches got evangelistic a lot more than they had been. And they started having what they called soul winning workshops. And the first one that led the way in that, as far as I know, was Tulsa. And so they had this big Tulsa soul winning workshop, and I mean, thousands attended it. And so I got invited because I was getting to be known in the preacher school connection, and I preached a lot at different places. And so I would be invited to speak on almost all of these soul winning workshops. And so in Tacoma, Washington in 1980, I had a night speech. They only had a couple of main speeches per day, but I happened to have one because I was a good friend of the guy that organized it. And so I ended up doing a night speech, and Chuck Lucas heard me speak. We had been on workshops before doing classes and all of that, but Chuck heard me do a main speech. And he was the one that started everything down at Gainesville, Florida, which led to all that we eventually became. So Chuck then advised Tom Brown, who was the campus minister at a mainline group in Boulder, Colorado. They were about to lose their pulpit guy, and Tom was the campus minister. And so Chuck advised him to talk to me and see if they could persuade me to come up and be the pulpit guy, but I could also help train his guys in campus ministry, train them in the Bible. And so Tom then met us at another Northwest soul winning workshop the next year in Spokane, met him on an elevator. Theresa and I did, and he started talking with us about the possibility of coming to Boulder. And so I told him, Tom, I've already got a group from Tacoma that's been working on me for a couple of years to move there, so I'm not interested. But he kept on pushing it and contacting me, and we were quite impressed with Tom. And so he wanted me to send him some tapes. He said they had a pulpit committee, search committee. He wanted me to send him a few cassette tapes, and that's the mode instead of a thumb drive, it was a cassette tape. So I sent 3 sermons reluctantly, but one of his elders heard the tapes, and one of them was very, very strong on evangelism. And the point basically was, I don't care what your role is, you still have the responsibility to win souls.
Right.
And one of his elders heard that, and I mentioned elders and deacons and preachers and all that by name. I don't care what your role is, you
Right.
still have a responsibility to be evangelistic. And this one elder listened to that, and he told Tom, that's it. We're done with Gordon. He's
Really?
not coming. We're not going to interview him. We're done.
Wow.
So he was offended by my tape, which I could have cared less. I was not intending to go there anyway.
Right.
But I think Tom felt badly, and sort of as a consolation prize, he invited me to come speak at the Rocky Mountain Evangelism Seminar in March of 1981. I remember it well. That was my first introduction to anything of the campus ministry movement at the time. I had met some of the guys at the soul winning workshops because they invited them to speak, Chuck Lucas in particular. But anyway, I went and spoke at that. And I was blown away with everything that I saw and heard. I thought they had people stand up that had been baptized in the last 2 years, and almost the whole audience stood up. And I was just blown away.
Wow.
And so I did a talk at that. No one knew who I was. I could all week hear people looking at the program and saying, Gordon Ferguson, who in the world is that? No one knew who I was, whereas in the mainstream churches, I was pretty well known.
Right.
For a young guy, especially.
Right.
And anyway, after that, I started being invited to speak at all kinds of things. That summer, I spoke at the Gainesville, Florida Evangelism Seminar that Chuck ran.
Okay,
and I
so
spoke in that.
Let me stop you right there. So at that time, sounds like there's a lot of crossover between the mainline church and the Crossroads movement or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what was going on there? What was the relationship between those churches?
Well, it was very mixed. What happened is Chuck trained a lot of young men and women to do what he had done. He had come into a mainline group and developed some ways to be a lot more effective. Bible talks, they call them soul talks back then, but Bible talks, meeting on campus and dorm rooms and really going after it, and very boldly really going after it. That was right in the early stages of the sexual revolution in full bloom. And I went to one campus Bible talk, and they started in Galatians 5:19, and works of the sinful nature, and if you do this, you're going to hell, etc. I mean, They were very bold, but they were baptizing hundreds of people. It was countercultural to the core.
Right.
One of my concerns for some of our young people today in the church is they're trying to find ways to kind of go along with the culture.
Right.
The Crossroads guys were totally countercultural in every way.
Okay.
And it was pretty amazing to see. But as a result of that, there were people like me that got interested because I was evangelistic. There were other people, the old guard was very turned off by it and called them a cult. And there were a lot of things written and said and preached, and there was quite a controversy with the younger group. So it was a mixed bag, but Chuck trained these people, and they would go into a mainstream group, like Tom Brown went to Boulder, and different ones went to different existing churches of Christ and tried to start a very evangelistic campus ministry group. But it was so different that the majority of the older people couldn't handle it, and many of those churches split. And so finally, they just started with Kip, especially pushed it. We just need to start new churches.
Right. Okay. So back to, you're at the Rocky Mountain Evangelism Seminar. Let me get back to your track on your overview of your career.
Okay. So after I spoke there, then everyone most of the leaders met me there and started inviting me to come and speak. And so I spoke at the Florida Evangelism Seminar every summer for the next 4 years before I actually got into the discipling movement. But I went to Boston, I went to places in Florida, I went to places in Montana, I went to a lot of other places. San Francisco, one of those back in those days, before you probably were there. But anyway, when it was the Berkeley ministry,
Berkeley Church. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I started traveling and doing a lot of speaking at those conferences, as well as trying to institute what I was learning with the Bible talks and discipling partners and all of that. Tried to institute that in the church I was in for 4 years and had some success in it, for sure. We definitely baptized a number of people, but getting people to go along with the discipling partner relationship, that was actually the biggest challenge. The church was fairly evangelistic. Maybe the best one that I was in up until I got into the discipling movement, in fact. But getting people to buy in to being open with their life, that was the hard sell. And so I came in after a meeting. I told the elders that had 3 elders. I said, we need to have a discipling time once a week. And they agreed to it because they didn't want to lose me. They liked my preaching. They didn't want to lose me.
Right.
So they agreed to it. But one day after I'd gotten with one of the elders was very open to it. He was great.
Right.
Really was great. He was full-time on staff, a great guy, very evangelistic, open with his life. I mean, he had the right heart. One of the other guys that I got with, he did it only under duress, basically.
Right.
But one day after meeting with him, I got so frustrated. I came home and I just thought, I don't know if I can handle any more of this. 4 years is a long time to try to turn a church around that doesn't seem to want to turn around, the leaders, the elders, at least. And so I came home, and we'd done a lot of moving by then, back in, Texas, Northwest. So I was thinking my wife is really not going to like it. Our daughter was in elementary school. Our son was in high school at the time. I thought if I bring up another move possibility, my wife will freak out. And so I asked her, all this is in that book, My 3 Lives, by the way. But anyway, I asked her very gently, I said, how are you feeling about the church here right now? My wife's a very gentle spirit. In very uncharacteristic ways. She turned around and she said, I'm sick of it. We're wasting our time here. They are not going to change. We might as well leave.
Wow.
And I almost fainted. But my wife wasn't even seeing a lot of what I was seeing in the discipling churches, but she was sold on it. And so she was having discipleship partners, and we had a couple of people who had graduated from University of Florida and were there, and she hooked up with one of those gals, and they were doing Bible talks all over and baptizing people. My wife was all in without even knowing that much about it, except what I told her I had seen.
Wow.
That gives you an idea of how spiritual my wife is. a lot more than her husband.
Yeah.
But at any rate, she said that day, and I thought, wow, I almost fainted. I couldn't believe she said that. But she said, I'm sick of it. They're not going to change. The leaders are not going to buy into it. We might as well leave. The next morning, I kept office hours. So the next morning, I'm in my church office. The secretary buzzes me and said, you got a call from some guy in California. And so I answered the phone, and one of the elders at that church in San Diego, George Havens, was on the other end of the line, and I had talked to him and Ron Brumley quite a lot. They had questions and had me come down to the church there at least once, but we had talked a lot. And George called me and said, listen, our guy is going to go to Boston for more training. We'd like you to consider becoming our evangelist. And again, I almost fainted. I looked out the window up at the sky, and I thought, God, what are you doing here?
What are the
It was
odds? What are the odds?
what are the odds? The very next morning after that talk with my wife. So
That
we ended up interviewing with them during the Christmas holidays and agreeing to come, which we did in June of 1985. We moved and officially became a part of what already we had been had our heart in and we're doing a lot of, or trying to.
Wow. Okay. So that was an exciting time. I mean, I became a Christian in 86. So you got there June of 85. It must have been an easy sell. I mean, you go to visit San Diego in December of any year, and that's a pretty nice place to go visit. Coming from Tacoma, Washington.
Right.
That must have been awesome. A little bonus aside from the spiritual factor.
Right.
But so the person who left is that Andy Lindo? Was he leading the
Andy
church?
Lindo left,
Okay.
and almost all the staff left.
Okay. Ed Townsend, was he a part of that? He
Ed
left.
Townsend, Jess Asper,
Yeah, all those guys would resurface later in different places.
the Bettons, everyone left almost except Jeff Chacon, who was an intern and single at the time. I did his wedding later.
Right.
And so we needed help. I didn't know anything about how to lead a discipling ministry.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Gordon. I mean, it was explosive. I mean, that period of time in San Diego was just, I mean, San Francisco was growing rapidly too, but they were like sister churches at the time.
Right.
And I mean, we'd go down for the evangelism seminars in San Diego. You guys would come up to San Francisco. Why was it so explosive? Can you share some of the highlights and why you think it was growing so quickly when you went there?
You know, that was a staggering time, actually. Mm-hmm. When I went, all we had left was a few interns. So basically, Greg Marutsky and I had been talking about working together. He tried to get me to come to Boulder a second time. I actually did interview that time. And the same elder that had reaction to my sermon audio that he heard, he and I locked horns in that interview process within 5 minutes, and it was done. So Greg was not all that happy about it. He had wanted me to move to Boulder. He had just bought a new house and wanted me to move to Boulder. And he was not that excited about joining me in San Diego, but the elders and I met with Tom Brown, and we basically blackmailed him. We said, Tom, we're sending you money to help in San Francisco. We want to keep doing it, but if we don't get some help and keep this church doing well here, we won't be able to do that financially, which was true. But we said, we need Greg. You left him there in your place when you left Boulder. You need to get him to San Diego. And Tom did. So that was an interesting lunch where we discussed all of that. But Greg moved there, and Greg had contacts. He was young. He was 26, 27 years old, but he had contacts. And so we started hiring people like Mike and Libby Rock and had them come in, and Jack and Kathy Rosenquist and others. But we started hiring people and bringing them in. And so that was a ton of help. Greg, we couldn't have done it without Greg. He kind of oversaw the campus and the singles. I worked with the teens and the marrieds until we kind of got into the regional approach to it. But anyway, we worked together. We called him the co-evangelist, and he spoke quite a lot, but he really connected with a younger crowd. I was 42 when I went there and considered old.
You were
42.
I remember my impression was like you were an old timer.
Old timer. 42 years old. Yeah.
You'd be considered a spring chicken these days, but back then I remember thinking, where'd they find this old timer?
Yeah, that's exactly true. It was funny. They thought I was old. A lot of stories connected with that. But anyway, one of the things we did that was fundamental is I recognized very quickly that the church had been trained to do whatever they were told to do. The large majority, all the young people. Mm-hmm. If you said jump, they said how high on the way up.
Right.
I mean, it was just amazing. I told my wife very quickly, I said, I don't know how to build one of these, but I'm going to try really hard not to mess it up.
Right.
And so one thing I recognized, though, is that they were very legalistic. And so I just told the elders they need some grace. And so we started meeting for midweeks, and I did a series on Romans, which I have a book on Romans. We started doing a series on Romans on midweek. So they already had down all the actions to do, but they needed to get the right heart and do it for the right reason, the right motivation. And so I started doing Romans, and it was like throwing a match on a gasoline can that was open.
Wow.
I mean, we just started exploding with growth. And we didn't have followaways. It was very, very rare anybody left. And when someone did, everyone else would say, what? They left? Why would they leave? Because we were all as busy as everything, knocking doors, doing campaigns, studying with people, baptizing. The year before, I think they had baptized 115. That was their best year. So in the interim before I came, I'd agreed to come, but I didn't come till mid-year. So during the early part of the year, not very many baptisms, but once we got there and got things in place and started teaching Romans and really trying to organize it the right way, we started baptizing a lot of people. And I remember asking at a Bible Talk leader meeting, how many do you think we could baptize this year? This was in the fall, because most all the baptisms came after June because other leaders were ready to leave and they weren't really that invested, I think.
Right.
So one person said 140 or something like that. And I said, bro, I appreciate the faith, but I'm not quite there. But we ended up baptizing 165.
Oh my gosh. In a fall, in like a 4-month period?
Most of it, I would say, was in the second half of the year, the large majority of it. I don't know the exact count, but we baptized 165. And the next year it was like 220. And the next year I left before that year was over, or right at the end of the year. And anyway, one of those years we had 385, more than one a day.
Oh my
so
gosh.
It was a wild time. It was a group in a high school of about 500 or so on Sunday mornings. When I went there, it was 1,250 in a El Cortez Convention Center when I left. Now, we did have move-ins. We had people move in from other places, but we baptized a ton of people. And as I said, we had very few people leave because the motivation was there.
Right.
We did teach a lot of grace, but we also taught a lot of this is what you do with the grace and helping the world know Christ. And so it was a magic time.
Wow.
Most everyone, if you talk to guys like Robert Carrillo today and people like that were like campus guys, or anyone almost that was there, they would tell you it was a very magic time.
It really was just a kind of a golden period. Just seemed like effortless in a way.
Yeah.
People just seeming to get baptized. There was a lot of activity, of course, but it just seemed like God's power was there.
It was amazing. Greg came up with this idea. He said, what we need to do is have a campaign. We called it the Life Campaign. Love is for everyone is what that stood for. He said, what we need to do is get everybody to take their vacations, and we'll rent out the dorms at San Diego State because they don't have that many people in the summer. And he said, we can knock doors and street preach and study with people and do all this. And I thought, this is crazy. But we'd been doing so many crazy things. I said, okay, Greg, let's talk to the elders. And we talked to them. They said, yeah, let's give it a go. So almost the entire church took vacations, moved into the dorm rooms at San Diego State, And for 2 weeks, we street preached, knocked doors, got on the trolleys and shared our faith to the trolley, moved to the next car at the next stop. And I mean, that's what we did for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Baptized a lot of people.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
We did it 2 years in a row, actually, 2 summers.
I remember hearing about that. That was amazing. Amazing.
But that was Marutsky's idea.
Well, yeah, Greg's an awesome guy. Now, you moved. Why'd you leave? Here you are. You're baptizing like crazy. Why in the world would you leave that situation?
Well, that was back when Boston was trying to kind of unify all of the discipling churches. And so a lot of guys were moving there. Tom Brown had moved there. Sam Lang had moved there. There were some pretty heavy hitter guys from the campus ministry movement who had moved there. And so we got invited, the 2 elders, Ron and Brumley and George Havens and Greg and me got invited to meet with Kip and Bob Gimple and Al Baird. And we met for 3 days. And the elders were saying, why should these guys move to Boston?
Right.
I mean, what we're doing there, why would we do that?
Right.
And it was more in trying to unite the churches. But of course, we were told we didn't know what we were doing. And so we needed more training because we didn't know what we were doing.
Oh my gosh.
That's what we were told, but it was more an effort to, I think, unify the discipling churches. And so it took a 3-day meeting. And finally, I just said, okay. And I don't know, I felt moved to do it. I didn't want to do it. That was not something that I jumped at the chance to do, but we agreed to do it. And I sort of led the way in doing that, and Greg was willing. And so he moved there and led the MIT ministry, a campus ministry. And then I moved, he moved in the summer to start the fall semester, and I moved at the end of the year in December and led a house church of 30-some people. So it was a very interesting move. I've been asked by people as I've told the story, do you regret moving? Do you feel like it was the right thing? And bottom line, I do, because I became an elder in Boston at a very crucial time. And I also then became a teacher and writer. I would not have written books had I not moved there. And given the overall impact of what I did in Boston, I think it was the right move, but the early stages of that, it didn't look like the right move and it didn't feel like the right move. It was totally a faith move. Be willing to go anywhere, do anything, give up everything. We preached it, so I decided I had better practice it.
So you don't regret it?
No.
Okay, so you ended up staying there quite a while.
Yeah, I stayed in Boston 16 years. I was appointed an elder fairly soon after being there with Al and Bob. And at one time, we were the only eldership in the whole movement because the ones in San Diego resigned. I think at one time we were the only 3 in the whole movement. So it was a pivotal time. And we were interested, of course, in raising up other elders and had a part in that. And I think all of us continued to work on seeing that happen. So I think the influence from Boston was important enough to have done it, but it was like leaving heaven.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Leave San Diego for a number of reasons. It was a delightful time.
Right. I can just imagine that would be quite a cost to count. Okay, so you were there for 16 years, and then why'd you leave there, and how'd you end up in Texas?
Well, actually, we got 2 places in between.
Okay.
Our daughter and her family were in Phoenix, and so we moved to Phoenix at the end of 2003 and stayed 9 years. The last several years of that, I had gotten off staff and started a teaching ministry. And during that time, helped start the Asia Pacific Leadership Academy. And so I was over there doing a lot of teaching. And now Roland Monhay, one of the teachers on the service team, directs that. It's still going. I went back a few years ago and did a graduation class and taught a course. And Roland's done a fantastic job with it. And anyway, I helped start that. We also started a similar program in Kiev, Ukraine. We had, in both of these, had two tracks of leadership training. We had one for the ministry guys that were on staff, and then we had another one we called a shepherding track. And so we were training future elders, we were training family group leaders, things like that. And so for those, that part of it just kept growing. There's only a certain amount of ministry guys you could train, but the shepherding track kept growing and may still be growing in Asia. Certainly not Kiev, but in Kiev we had people coming from all over the old Soviet Union to be a part of the shepherding training. It was amazing how much that grew in the years that we were going. So during the last part of my 9-year stint, or our 9-year stint, I was doing a lot of training, and Theresa worked with me, especially in the Ukraine part. She worked with me a lot in that one. And so we made many trips to the Ukraine, and people from all over the old Soviet Union came in for the shepherding part of that. And so we did that, worked a lot with the church in Houston for a couple of years. And so I remember counting up one year when I lived in Phoenix, I spent 1/3 of the time in Phoenix and 2/3 on the road.
Wow.
So did that for several years and then moved to Los Angeles, to Orange County, and spent 2 years trying to help resurrect the Pacific School of Ministry that had kind of fallen by the wayside. So I moved there mainly to teach their staff guys Bible courses, and did that for 2 years, and then moved to Dallas after that. Our son was on the planting to Hawaii in 1989, and he stayed after he graduated. He married there, had his 3 boys there, and they stayed there 25 years, but they had moved to Dallas. Our daughter by marriage, Joy, her sister and her family had moved here, and they wanted to be close to them, so they moved to Dallas. And so 6 months later, we did, to be around our grandsons that we only got to see a couple times a year. And so all 3 of them were last week at the conference in Orlando.
Wow.
One's 24 and the youngest is 17. So
wow, that's awesome. So you've got adult grandchildren. So do you consider yourself retired now?
I try to say that, but I usually say semi-retired because I'm still writing. I've still written books, and I've got 2 websites. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to quit traveling long distances. My wife has some lung issues, COPD actually. So traveling long distances is kind of out of it now for her. And so I decided to quit doing the traveling part overseas at least. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden we got Zoom stuff. So I'm still speaking on programs and doing teaching sessions and all of that on Zoom all over the world still.
Wow.
So retired doesn't quite fit.
Right. You're still active, but it's clear that it seems like your evangelistic, like your preaching career really peaked out there in San Diego. And then there's a shift, like more into eldership, pastoring, and teaching.
Teaching.
And really got into the teaching. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what?
Yeah.
I mean, you've written a ton of books.
Right.
Why'd you start? And got any favorites?
Yeah. Well, basically, in Boston, I was an elder and an evangelist functioning in those 2 roles. I was leading regions. We had different terms for them back then, but I was leading a region and being an elder and doing some teaching. But then in 93, Randy McKean, who was the congregational evangelist, said, I want you to put on a teacher hat here and let that and the elder hat be what you do. And so at that point, they freed me up to start doing a lot of that. And I started writing. And then every time I at first wrote booklets. And so I had some booklets that became pretty well known, like Justified on Romans and Death Before Denial on Revelation. And they would be long study guide booklets. And they would put cassette tapes with those in a plastic package and sell them. But then I'd be invited to other churches to do it and all of that. And every time I wrote a booklet and later a book, Randy would have what he called a Bible Jubilee. And we would meet as the whole church, like in the Boston Garden, and I would just teach that subject all day long. Would have, of course, some other things interspersed in that, singing and so forth, but I would teach all day. And Randy started all of that. Randy and Dan Bathon together, who was our world sector administrator, started DPI with Tom Jones, Tom and Sheila. And I started writing then and turned some of the booklets into books or just wrote books. And so in 1995, I had the time to do a lot of writing. I was still functioning as an elder. That was a busy job in a place like Boston. But I also was freed up enough to do the writing. And so I started writing full-length books in 95. So from 93 to 95, I did a lot of booklets and teaching days and started staff training. We had a number of courses that we would teach to all of the staff. And so a lot of the guys now, like Kevin Miller and Chris Zillman and names like that now, they were in my early ministry training that I did in Boston.
They were the kids back then.
They were kids back then in college or right out of college. So anyway, a long time ago, back in the 90s. But
how many books?
Anyway, Randy was the brainchild of all of that and set it up for me to do it, had me do the same thing, a lot of staff training in Europe. So we did a lot of travel to Europe and went to new plantings and tried to encourage them. So Theresa and I spent probably on average 2 months a year in Europe. One time we spent 6 months in Paris, lived in Paris 6 months.
Nice. Oh boy, that's awesome.
So that was a pretty cool gig there, I'll say.
That's a nice setup. I love that.
But I owe Randy and Kay McKean a lot because they got us on the teacher track and the writing track.
Yeah.
And so one of the early books I wrote was Prepared to Answer was the first one on a lot of different church doctrines. But the second one was Victory of Surrender, which is one I had really wanted to write, and that has become the crowd favorite. And Tony said he took a stack of them to the conference and they were gone quickly. And that usually happens. It's kind of a rite of passage for a lot of young people to read that book.
Okay. I remember you preaching that lesson in the 80s and just getting blown away. I mean, it was just like, whoa. Can you talk a little bit about how you even came up with the idea and just what just summarize it a little bit?
Well, surrender's always been a challenge. It's another word for the ultimate trusting faith to me. But it's always been a challenge. And I read a book that had a title similar to that by E. Stanley Jones. And I was smitten with it and realized that surrender is an all or nothing thing. And I was still in the main line when I got onto this thing. But someone recommended a couple of books that I read that convicted me like everything back when I was still in the mainstream group, the last one. And so I started preaching about it and praying about it and trying really hard to live it. And there were many things that had happened in my life that I write about in the book and other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And there's some beautiful stories in it about what people did that are blowaway. And so those stories out of my life and other people's lives just they have a profound effect when you hear of what people did in the face of challenges, cancer and death of a mate, death of a child. I mean, there are a lot of illustrations in that book that moves you. They move me. I've read that book. I told someone I wrote it as a reference book for myself. I've read it at least a dozen times. I've gone on retreats, and I'll have about 3 books that I will reread that have a profound impact on my own life. And that's one of them. I've read that book.
Right.
Back during 2003, when the churches were going through a lot of challenges, after a particular staff meeting, Jeannie Shaw, this was back when Wyndham was alive and he and I were fellow elders, but Jeannie and my wife pulled me aside and said, "Gordon, you're in a bad place. You need to go away by yourself and have a retreat and read your book on surrender." And I thought about it a minute and I said, well, something's wrong with me, so I'll do it. And I did. There are a couple of others I read as well that I have read more than one time. But
right.
Anyway.
That's an amazing concept in book. So that's fantastic. Now let's talk a little bit about you and Theresa. You guys, there's always, anytime I've seen you together, there's a sparkle. I mean, there's a real, you can sense the chemistry between you guys. There's something going on there.
Right.
What's made the difference? I mean, is there, I know, God's blessed you, but like, what have you done? What's helped you to have a relationship that's vibrant?
Well, I wrote a book I didn't have planned. I wrote 3 books one year back in 2016. I didn't have this one planned, but I decided to write it because I talk about my wife a lot in sermons and stuff. I've gotten other guys in trouble. Their wives, one of them counted how many times in a teaching day I mentioned my wife, and I think it was 50 something.
Wow.
And so this guy's wife, he's a good friend and they've got a great marriage, but she said, "You never mentioned me," anything like that. So I've gotten a few other guys into trouble. But anyway, I decided to write a book and I called it Fairy Tales Do Come True.
Wow.
And it has 16 principles, 16 short chapters. It's not a long book, it's a short one. But there are 16 principles that we think have contributed to making our marriage a fairy tale come true. But I would say the bottom line thing, honestly, is that we both, it took a few years to get there, but we both got to the point that God became the all-consuming priority in our life. And so there's never any doubt about what we wake up thinking about and go to bed thinking about, and it's always going to be about God and what does God want of our life. Why are we here? What's our purpose? What are our gift sets? What does he want us to be doing?
Right.
And it's the same way right now. I mean, nothing's changed. It's been a long time since I've been a paid staff member, but it's the same thing every day for us. I mean, all day we're thinking about who can we influence, who can we encourage. My wife has been instrumental in helping several people who had left the church for a long time come back, and they're all doing great. She mentioned 3 people this morning that she has helped come back to church. And so she's on the phone, she's writing, she's talking. She loves to talk. And so she's on the phone talking to people all the time. And we're thinking of who can we influence? And so we have a little cottage that we got a few years ago that's across the street from a lake in East Texas, a little 2-bedroom cottage. And we spend a fair amount of time there, but we know everyone that lives in that little area. And we reach out to them. And my wife was talking this morning about this one that she's reaching out to, that I've also talked to her and her husband, a number of times. And so we just have a priority that unites us.
Right.
And so my wife, there's some guys, their wives are in the ministry because their husbands want to be. They are not so much into it. But my wife's always been as much into it as me. She's always wanted to be that since she was a little kid. She's always wanted to be helping people know about Jesus. So anyway, the priority thing there and us putting God first, which means that when we're messing up with each other or with anybody else, we're always going to be open to be challenged about it from God's word. And so that priority is the key to our marriage.
That's
but
fantastic.
There is a spark. It'll be 58 years in January.
Oh, congratulations. Congratulations.
So the spark's still there.
Gordon, you've been battling cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's been happening?
Well, I got diagnosed officially with cancer back in January. And since then, I have had radiation treatments and chemo treatments. The crazy thing that happened, I did well for 3 weeks doing those treatments after a lot of testing prior to that about exact location, et cetera. And so I was going through the treatment. And after 3 weeks, the chemo had an effect on me that's very, very rare. I have an enzyme deficiency that a very small percentage of the population has. And about the only thing that affects it is this particular chemo that's used for 2 parts of the body. And there have been court cases about it in France and whatever. I mean, it kills people. And it nearly killed me, but I happen to be in very good condition from a ton of walking that I've done, especially during the pandemic. And so I was in the hospital for 23 days. And 5 days, I went one afternoon, Easter Sunday. That afternoon, I started having horrendous diarrhea. And by the next morning, I had to be helped out of the car into a wheelchair to get a radiation treatment. And at that point, it was obvious I wasn't going to be able to continue the treatments and didn't know what was going on. It was just, I knew it had to be a reaction to the chemo. But 5 days, I just slept and had problems and hardly ate anything. And so I went and got some fluids put in intravenously one day on a Tuesday. And then that Friday, I was back at a nurse practitioner who was working with the chemo doctor. And she basically thought I ought to go in the hospital. And she finally asked the right question because I didn't want to go in the hospital. She said, "Do you think you'll be okay if you go home?" And I thought to myself then, I said, "No, I think I'll die."
Wow.
She said, "Okay, well, that gives you your answer because both I and the doctor think you should be in a hospital." So we went and checked in at that point. And so the first 10 days was wild and crazy. I've got some Facebook posts in which I told some about it. I've got 2 articles called A Roller Coaster Ride with God, part 1 and 2, that are on my teaching website, gordonferguson.org.
You can't stop writing even when you're in crisis.
Well, I was asking for prayers because I thought I was going to die. So I have a podcast series that I'm going to start in the next few weeks. And with insights I got from that 23-day stay in the hospital,
Wow.
But I'm probably going to entitle it Sitting with God on the Brink of Eternity.
Wow.
Because I thought it was 50-50 that I live or die. The first 10 days, they gave me nothing but saline solution. So I went probably almost 15 days without food. And there were medical reasons. They were afraid to give me what they call a pick and give me nourishment intravenously, but they eventually did. And I started getting better and finally got out of the hospital. But anyway, I couldn't go back on the chemo, obviously, but I did finish the radiation treatment later. And hopefully it got it, but I don't know for sure right now. They say it keeps working, the radiation, for about 3 months at least. So they're not going to do testing until September. So I will not know till then if I still have cancer or I do not.
I mean, you look really good. I expected you to look much worse than you do. Your face is full. You're not super skinny. You've got flesh on your face and your body, so you're looking pretty good. So must have had a pretty good recovery since you got out of the hospital.
Right. The first almost 3 weeks, I was so weak. I thought, well, this is going to be my new normal. I've just lost so much strength. Now, I did lose a lot of weight. I've gained just a little of it back. I'm actually down to where I wanted to be. I had gained some weight that I needed to lose. So I've gained back a little of it, but not much. I lost over 20 pounds.
Wow.
And so I kept pushing myself to try to get outside and do walking. And the first time around the block, just around one block, I thought I shouldn't have done this. I'm not sure I can make it back to the house, but I did.
Right.
And so I just kept pushing myself. And finally, at about the 3-week mark, it kind of kicked in. And now I'm back to walking like I was before, same speed. I walk very fast. It's exercise walk.
How far are you walking?
I was doing 3 to 5 a day, 3 to 5 miles a day, probably 6 days a week. Now I'm doing like 3 days a week, and I've been doing 4 miles. And so I did 4 miles yesterday. I skipped today. I'll walk again tomorrow.
Right. Okay. So when you were going through that and you're so sick, how did that affect your relationship with God? Like what insights did you see as you thought about, hey, I could die here?
Well, the nights were horrible. I had hallucinations and delusions, and it was just weird. But the odd thing is if somebody was talking to me, I could kind of pull out of that and really talk and make sense reasonably well. And so I called my son, of course, lives close to me here in the Dallas area. So I called him and his wife and 3 boys up because I thought I told them I may die here. So we had a very serious talk, and I wanted to help them help my wife with some immediate things. If I die, here are some immediate financial things. Here's how to help take care of her, et cetera. I'm the one that does the finances, so I needed to kind of pass that on to my oldest grandson. Graduated with a degree in business and has a financial job now. So I said, get out a pen and paper and take down what I tell you here. Mm-hmm. So some people are crying because of contemplating me dying, and some are trying to concentrate on what I'm trying to tell them. So it was a very emotional night, shall we say. But I told them at the end of it, I said, guys, I've been trying to teach you how to live well.
Right.
But I also want to teach you how to die well, because we're all going to do it.
Yep.
And so it's a very sober night, and I'll cover this in the podcast that I'm going to be doing.
Right.
But I couldn't sleep hardly at all. I mean, it was very hard to sleep. So I just kind of catnap day and night. But most of the time I was sitting on the brink with God, talking to him. And I had some insights that to me were pretty phenomenal. In fact, I was so pumped up by the time I got out of the hospital. And it wasn't because I got better and I was getting out of the hospital. It was because every night I'm talking to God most of the night as a friend.
Right.
Me and him were talking. And so typically when I would try to go to sleep, I'd say, God, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. I don't know if I want to make it or not. Because if I do make it, then that'll mean I'll have to have another time maybe like this to die, because we're all going to die. So I'm not sure going right now might be the best shot, but all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So you're going to have to figure that out. That's your problem. That's above my pay grade. I'm going to try to go to sleep. So those are the kind of conversations that I had with God. And I got some insights. I've always struggled with my view of God because of my legalistic upbringing. But I got some insights that really, really helped me, and I think will help other people. And that's why I decided to do a series of podcasts. But I've written a lot of stuff up that I want to cover, written about 40 pages. So I've got maybe 20 different topics, and they're not necessarily related. Some of them have nothing to do with how I view God.
Okay, wait, Gordon, you got to give us a teaser here. I know you're going to do your own podcast, which is awesome, and I can't wait to hear it. Can you give us a little bit of a preview?
Okay, well, I have tended to see God uh, as harsh based on a lot of Old Testament examples, etc. I mean, he was pretty strong medicine in the Old Testament a lot of times. And because of the way I was raised, I tended to see God more as creator and judge, Lord of Lords, King of Kings, not nearly as much as a father, especially an Abba father and a friend. And I wasn't even sure how he wanted me to see him, tell you the truth. And so I've had the times that I was teaching Romans, I was pretty straight on it because my Roman stuff's really good.
Right.
It helps me and helps a lot of people. It's amazing. I've gotten comments in the last 2 weeks. I had one brother up in his 80s who called me and left me a message with tears. And this guy's been around forever. He's a great disciple. But that Romans book has helped him to the point that in leaving a message for me on voicemail, he was crying. And I've had two different people talk to me in the last 2 weeks about Romans and how that book has affected them and what people are doing with it, etc. So that's one of my favorite books. So when I was teaching Romans a lot, I think I had a healthy view of God totally. Mm-hmm. But somehow, as I've not taught Romans as much, I kind of reverted some. But in the hospital, I boiled it down. I said, okay, if I had to describe what is the ultimate heart of God, if I could only pick one word, what would that one word be that describes God better than any other word? And I came up with one that to me was a monumental revelation. It's biblical as everything, and it's not what you think. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. Go to podcast.
There you go. Okay, well.
But once I hit on that, it had ramifications that went in all directions.
Wow.
And I was so pumped up. I talked to Tom Jones right while I was still in the hospital, maybe just before I got out or maybe right after I got out. He actually asked me, we know each other backwards and forwards for decades. Tom actually asked me, have you ever thought about the fact that you might be bipolar? Because he thought I was in such a manic state, a euphoric state, that it was unusual for me, which it was. And I told him, Tom, you know me well. I'm depressive, man. I'm not the kind of guy that stays in a manic state at all. I'm the depressive type. But I understand why he said it, because I was so pumped up. Now that kind of gradually faded some after I got out, but it was because of the experience with God that I had. To know that I was near death and could die, and a number of people have died from this particular reaction. It's been to court in France, and it's a discussed issue. Hardly anyone knows what the enzyme deficiency is. The name is a long name. Even doctors I've asked don't know what it is. And I think the disclaimer that the pharmaceutical company had should have been a lot clearer than the one that they do give, but that's another matter.
Right.
But at any rate, I happen to be a very, very unusual, rare case in this regard.
Wow.
But the experience in the hospital, knowing that you could die at any time, it was surreal, but it wasn't scary. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid to die. And I literally signed off about every night, just about like I described there. I don't know if I want to go or stay. Because if I don't die, I'll have to go through something again in order to die. And I'm not sure I want to do this again. So anyway, it was a very interesting experience, but I got so many insights out of it from so many different directions. And I'm going to cover all of those in the podcast series because it was, I mean, there were just some amazing things that happened. I'll give you one other. A sister in our region got a banner printed up, just telling me they love me and were praying for me, whatever. But it was printed up. It was about 6 foot long and maybe 2.5 foot the other way. It's a horizontal one, landscape. And she took it to a marriage retreat we were having here in Dallas. I was in the hospital. They were having a marriage retreat that Roger and Marcia Lamb were conducting, speaking for. And so she told people, come up and sign it. And so a lot of people just wrote a nice little short thing. Well, my daughter by marriage, I call her Joy, our son's wife, but she's our daughter. Anyway, Joy brought it up to the hospital, and there was a space where a shelf was that it fit right under that shelf perfectly, as if it were made for it. And she taped it in there. So everyone that walked in saw that banner and asked about it. And I talked to people all day long for 21 days about my life and God and me and God and the church. I mean, I had the most amazing conversations. That alone could help explain a lot of the euphoria because it just pumps you up to be able to talk to people about God and to find out so many people were willing to talk. And so that was one thing that I will write about that one because I ran into some unusual responses, positive responses. There are a lot more people out there that have God on their mind than we think.
Right, right.
Definitely here in the Bible Belt. There's no doubt about that. So that was an amazing experience.
Wow.
And so I talked to doctors and, everyone. I had all kind of, I was in a teaching hospital where a medical school is, the largest one in Texas. So I had all kind of specialists coming in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I had students coming in. Even though I was about to die, I had students coming in as a part of their curriculum to interview patients. And that was kind of wild. I'm thinking, here I am thinking I may die anytime, and they're in here wanting to talk with me, and I got a tube down my nose into my stomach, and it hurts to talk, but I forced myself to go ahead and talk. And I had so many conversations. It was amazing.
That is amazing. God used that to help reach out to people. When you look back on your life, I mean, there had to be some time of reflection and evaluation. Is there anything you do differently?
I think it's all a matter of kind of how we deal with the priorities in our life. I heard an elder say one time in a church I was preaching for back years ago. He was teaching a class and he said, never give up your life for anything that death can take away. And I immediately made a note of that. In every Bible that I have, I write in the front of it, never give your life up for anything that death can take away. And so in looking back at my life, I feel good about a lot of it. But I would say that there were times I was raised in a family that was my dad's side of the family. They weren't church people at all, quite the contrary, for the most part. Maybe some later in life, but they were a party family, and I liked that part of it. So I was drawn to them rather than my mother's side, which were the weird little Christian groups side. They were weird, I thought, and they were. And so I was drawn to my dad's side. And so they were big into outdoor stuff. And so hunting and fishing, and my dad was a very good golfer. I never was as good as he was. But I had a lot of hobbies. If I had it all to do over as a young guy, especially with children, I would have made my children a lot more my hobby, and I would not have been doing all the other stuff that I did. But it's the way I was raised, And a lot of church people I knew were kind of the same way. They had these hobbies. And in Louisiana, hunting and fishing were two of them. I remember when Barry Beatty died, at his memorial, Lynn said, if I recall, people asked me what was Barry's hobby. Barry didn't have a hobby except his family. His family was his hobby. If I remember that correctly. A lot of years since Barry died, he was one of my early acquaintances in the discipling movement and a magnificent man. His wife, Lynn, is now remarried to Dr. Ottenweller. And so that's quite a love story with Mark and Lynn. They both lost their mates and they're married to each other. But if I recall correctly, Lynn was and Barry were some of the early ones I met in the discipling movement. And that is one thing I would definitely reevaluate is how I spend my time. I think there's a place for recreation, but I think I was too much into my hobbies and I would change that part of it for sure.
So like fishing and hunting and letting that go and making your family, your kids more of your focus, spending more time.
If I could get them involved in it.
Right.
Now, my son, he wasn't much into that. I took him some.
Right.
But he never clicked with it. My daughter might have clicked more with the fishing part than he did. But I didn't try to make that a priority. Fortunately for me, my father was pretty harsh when I was young. He improved with age a lot. And I helped him a lot. When I got spiritual, I helped him a lot.
Right.
But when I was young, the one thing that we did have, though, is we hunted and fished together.
Right.
And then later bowled together in a league when I was in my teens and golfed when I was older. He didn't have enough patience to teach me when I was young, so I took it up on my own when I was older, and then we played a lot of golf together.
Right.
But anyway, I could have involved them. If you involve your children in your hobbies, that's a good thing.
Right.
But if you're doing those independently, and then I was very busy, I would probably reevaluate some of what I agreed to do, because there was a period of time when my kids were like in their teen years, when I traveled like crazy. When I met the discipling movement, I was in the airport all the time. I was preaching locally in Washington State in a mainstream church, but I was traveling like everything, going to all these other places. I might have said yes more than I should have to some of that. I could have evaluated more how much I was at home. Theresa was fine with it.
Right.
Because she was so into the whole concept of ministry and discipling and evangelism and all of that. She was fine. She did not feel like a neglected wife. We had a great relationship even through that period of time. But I do feel like I did not spend near enough time with my children. And then I did not talk with them enough about what I was doing and why. I did not explain enough. I think they needed explanations. And had I given them enough explanations about what I was doing and why and where my heart was and all of that, they might have been okay with that. But I'm sure they felt neglected at times, rightly so.
Well, let's shift the focus here and talk a little bit about our family of churches, the ICOC, the Church of Christ that we're a part of. Like when you take a look at it, it's clear things have slowed down. It's certainly not where it was in the 80s or 90s. But what do you feel like needs to happen for our family of churches to grow going forward?
I think we had a tough time in the early 2000s. Those of us old enough to remember that understand it. And a lot of it was about motivation. We were doing a lot of right things, but we were being pressured and motivated in ways that I think were counterproductive in the long term. In the short term, they seemed to work. In the long term, not. Now, I think our motivation in San Diego those years because of the focus on grace and all of that. I think that motivation was great. And I, I don't think people felt pressured, even though they were busy as everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we motivated in some wrong ways. And so because of that, a lot of people have backed off of doing things that are right things that we should be doing, evangelism being among them. But if I had to say what is at the heart of it, one of my good friends is my publisher, Tony Mulholland. He goes way, way, way back to the Crossroads days. Tony says, our real failure is a lack of discipling. And I thought about that, and I said, when people have asked me, why did you get into this movement? Discipling was the reason. I was evangelistic before that. I didn't get in because of the evangelism, even though the evangelism was a lot more effective. I didn't get in the movement because of the evangelism per se. It was the discipling. I knew that was a missing ingredient, having people in your life. And so the more I've thought about what Tony said, I agree that discipling and the lack of it is really hurting us. And I think when you look at discipling, you've got to look at two things that you're trying to accomplish. The overall thing in discipling is you're trying to help people learn to imitate Jesus. And the two parts of that are Jesus' character, what he was like, how he related to people, how he related to God, what his characteristics were. That's one part of it. The other part of it is his mission. And so discipling is not just sharing all your problems with someone. It's not a counseling session, although counseling gets accomplished when you do have problems. But basically what you're trying to do is help people understand your greatest goal in life is to represent Jesus. You're made in his image. You are an image bearer of Jesus. The Bible says that he's the fullness of God. That means that in the flesh, he demonstrated God, because you couldn't understand God just from reading the Old Testament. But Jesus was the flesh and blood demonstration. He said in John, 14 or 16, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Right.
And so we had to see God in the flesh to really grasp him. And then it says the church is the fullness of Christ. So we had to see God in the flesh to understand him. People have to see Jesus in the flesh in the form of his disciples to really understand Jesus. And so our task in this life is to represent him, to do what he would do if he were here, to be what he would be if he were here. And that includes his character and his mission to seek and save the lost. And so a discipleship time covers both of those. In fact, this brother that called me, who's in his 80s, and he's really turned on right now by Romans, and he's just ecstatic. He's so happy with God. It's amazing. And this guy's been a great disciple for years. But when I went to San Diego, he and I had a discipling relationship, and I was helping raise him up as an elder, actually, was the idea that they wanted me to do. But he's a great brother. He and I are good friends. He was a school principal at the time. And he told me, Gordon, here's what I want to do. He said, I have to leave early in the morning, but I want us to talk on the phone every morning at 5:30. I think it was something like that. He said, I want us to talk every morning, and I want you to help me really stay on top of my evangelism. So I want you to ask me, how did it go yesterday in evangelism? And what do you have planned for today? He said, I want you to ask me those two questions every morning at 5:30. I said, okay, bro, that's too early for me, but I'll do it. For such a cause as that, I'll get up and do it. And I did.
Oh my gosh.
But he's a school principal. But that's where his heart was. He wanted to share Jesus every day. And that was discipling. Now, did we talk about other things? Absolutely. Did we shed tears about other things, our sins and our sinful nature and our mistakes and all that? Sure, we did all of those things. But we had a component in it, not only about imitating the character of Jesus, but the mission of Jesus. And I think if we don't have those two things, we are not consistently going to be evangelistic. Some of us will. It's built into us. We've done it long enough. It's a part of our character and the way we think, and we're going to do it. We're going to share our faith.
Right.
But we'd do a better job of it if we're talking to someone about it, because we'd think more about it and we'd get help with it and about how to be more effective. So I don't care how much it's even a part of our nature and we still do it. I don't do it as much as I used to do it, but I still do it. I mean, during the pandemic, that's been murder for me because I didn't want to catch COVID and give it to my wife. She's had pneumonia 7 times.
Oh my gosh.
So I have to be very careful, but I wrote a little book called God, Are We Good? It's a very basic book, but I thought of all the friends and relatives I have that I never see. And I said, you know, this is the shortest book I've ever written, but I said, I can send that to them. And I wrote it for that reason, to be able to give to people that I don't ordinarily get time with, or even as a precursor to those that I do. I've given it to neighbors and stuff. But I wrote that little book during the pandemic last year and mailed it to a lot of relatives and stuff, and wrote a letter with it, personalized letter to them. And then a couple of months later, wrote a follow-up letter. I've looked for ways to keep my hat in the ring evangelistically, even during the pandemic. But if I would talk to someone every day at 5:30 in the morning,
right.
I'm not saying do that, or you have to do it, or even that you ought to do it. I'm just saying that's the spirit that we need to have, that brother had. Jerry Jordan is his name. But to have that spirit that you want to be like Jesus, both in character, who you are as a person, but also in mission.
Wow.
And so if we had people we talked to on a regular basis, and we included what we were doing evangelistically, I think it would turn things around significantly and help us get the heart back.
Right.
You know, why do I share my faith? It has nothing to do with somebody's going to ask me about it, because no one hardly asks me about it anymore.
Right.
You didn't ask me about it.
Right.
We hardly do that anymore. But I just want us to have the heart of Jesus. That's all.
Right.
If we're like Jesus, we can't help but share our faith. He couldn't help but do that. No way he could have stopped doing that. That's who he was. That's why he came to earth.
Right.
And that's why we're on earth, is to get prepared. Never give your life up for anything that death can take away. What does that mean? What cannot death take away? It cannot take away my eternal soul, and it cannot take away the souls of people that I help know God. It'll take away everything else.
Yeah.
That's all that it won't take away.
What advice would you give to a person who wants to make this life count? They're looking at your life and go, okay, this is a life well lived. How can I imitate that? What advice would you give to them to have that no regrets life?
To wake up every day and pray and say, God, I'm an image bearer for you. I'm a picture of Jesus. I may be the only Bible that some people ever read at my job, at my school, in my neighborhood, wherever. I may be the only Jesus that they know, or representative of Jesus. And so I want to live in a way where every day I pray, God, if you want to do for me today, like you did with Philip, and lead me to a eunuch type person that has an open heart. Help me to see it. Mm. In one of those articles I wrote about the roller coaster ride with God, I talk about seeing God, and that God is there. He wants to be seen. He can be seen, and he wants to be seen, not visibly, obviously, but we can see him in our lives. And there are all kinds of things that happen in my life that's God. That's God giving me a hug. Mm. And that'll be one of my podcast things is talking about that kind of relationship with God, where he gives you hugs if you're looking for it.
Right.
God can be seen. And if I'm tuned in and looking for opportunities, then God is going to open doors for me. Hmm. And so whatever I'm doing, whatever my career is, I need to be successful at it. I don't need to be taken over by it. I don't need to live for it. I need to work to live, not live to work. But I also want to be a great representative for God. And I want to do great in my job, because then when I talk to people, they'll say, that dude right there, he's a serious dude. Hmm. He or she does great in their job. And if they've got something going because of God, it might do me good to listen to them.
Wow.
And so I have heard many stories, as you have, of people on their jobs. And when their co-workers have problems, who do they come to? They come to them. Mm-hmm. Because they recognize they have a different spirit about them. And they also, of course, work God into all the conversations they can so the people know where to come to.
That's right.
And so to me is to just recognize you're an image bearer and tell God, as you're doing that, please, through the Holy Spirit, guide today's activities. And if something is there, help me to see it and to know how to act on it and to act on it. And it's just that daily influence that we have in our lives that leads to big moments. Mm. We don't have big moments every day. We don't have big moments most days. They're fairly rare, but there are those other days that contribute to making that happen. So every day I belong to God. Mm. And whatever he wants to do, that's a part of my prayer. God, whatever you want to do with me today, I just want to be about your purpose for me. Whatever that is, show it to me. I'm all in.
So being aware, having an awareness, hey, I'm here representing God. I'm open to his purposes. Just having your antennas out, so to speak. It reminds me of that old song, "Lead Me to Some Soul Today." You know,
Zach, I love that song.
Yeah, it's a great song. We don't sing it very often, if at all, but the words are blow away. Really awesome.
And so many examples. I was telling someone about this one the other day. They've translated my books into a number of languages, but one of my books was translated into Chinese. And there was a Chinese brother. These are underground churches, very, very risky deal to be a Christian in China. This brother was on a train reading one of my books that had been translated. This woman walks over to him and said, "Is that a Christian book?" So he's thinking, okay, what if she's an official? What should I say? Should I tell the truth or should I lie? And he told her the truth. She said, "I've been looking for a Christian book. Can I borrow that one?" And I think as the story went, she became a disciple.
Wow.
And I've got many stories like that where people were just doing something out of the ordinary and got noticed.
Right.
Stories that are almost unbelievable. I could write a second book on surrender and have plenty of illustrations.
I'm sure it's on its way. That's fantastic. Talking about your books and your podcast, I mean, you certainly sparked my interest. I know you've written so many. Where would people find your books? Where are they going to find your podcast?
Okay, the podcast will be on YouTube. I don't have it all designed yet, but I've got the YouTube channel. and I will put it on my Facebook post.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I also have a Facebook page for my Gordon Ferguson teaching ministry. And so anyone can get on that. And I put a lot of my posts on that because I can only have 5,000 Facebook friends. That's a max. And I've been maxed out since I started my Facebook page or a couple of weeks after. So I can't have everyone as a Facebook friend, but I have a Facebook page also, Gordon Ferguson Teaching Ministry, that directs people to my gordonferguson.org teaching ministry website. And I got tons of articles on there that people can read anytime. And I will put posts on there about the podcast and how to find that. My books are with Illumination Publishers. That's just ipibooks.com. ipibooks.com. All of my books that are in print are available there. I got at least one that's out of print, and probably will not be reprinted. Others of mine get reprinted occasionally.
Got it. Well, Gordon, thank you so much for the time. I'm glad you made it through that health scare and you're with us for longer. Please give my best to Theresa. I'm really sorry that she couldn't join us on the interview today.
One thing you didn't mention is that you and I performed a wedding together once.
That's right. That's right.
Your listeners need to know that. You and I co-performed a wedding.
For Dave and Jackie Peligian. That's right. For my mom, my mother-in-law, and father-in-law.
Yes.
I was wondering if you even remembered that, Gordon, to be honest.
I did. I had heard a lot of good things about you, and I actually felt very honored to be able to co-perform a wedding with you.
Well, that's how I felt. I'm surprised you felt that way. I was a nobody.
I did. I did. I had heard very impressive things about you, and it was an honor to be there with you doing that wedding. It was a special wedding.
It was 1993. Great time. That was fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining the Rob Skinner podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please hit the subscribe button and let your friends know about it and how to find it. Because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.